Get out of my house. You useless old fool. They's not again. That's what I heard the moment I stepped out of the cab. Suitcase in hand. Dust from the highway still clinging to my jacket. My daughter's voice cut through the air like a blade. Standing on the porch with her husband behind her. Arms crossed, as if I were some stray that had wandered too close. I froze at the edge of the walkway. Stunned by words I couldn't believe belonged to Clara, the same little girl whose first steps I once caught on this very lawn. Behind her, their boy, Sam, peeked through the screen door, his small fingers gripping the mesh. He didn't smile. He just watched, wide-eyed, as if unsure whether I was still the grandfather who built him a tree swing or someone entirely different. I looked past them at the house. Fresh paint on the siding, a new truck in the drive. And yet I could still see the beams I had raised with my own hands 35 years ago. The floorboards I sanded late at night after long shifts at the shipping yard. Every inch of it carried pieces of my life. My late wife's laughter, birthday candles, Sunday, dinners. Clara shifted her weight, eyes hard, and said it again, slower this time, as if to erase any doubt. You don't live here anymore. Then, I felt the paper bag slip from my fingers. The small souvenirs I'd picked up on my trip, spilling across the gravel. A carved whistle for Sam. A tin of peppermint candies. For a heartbeat, I almost bent to gather them. But something inside me stopped. Maybe it was pride. Maybe just the final crack of a heart too tired to plead. The wind off the bay rolled through the yard, carrying the smell of salt and sawdust. I straightened, resting one hand on the handle of my worn leather case. Whatever storm waited beyond that door, I would face it standing tall, even if it meant walking away from everything I once called home. My name is Arthur Bennett. For most of my life, I believed the measure of a man was how steady he stood when the world tried to shake him. I grew up in a logging town tucked between the ridges of Northern California, where mornings smelled of sap and damp earth, and nights were stitched with the low hum of sawmills. By 18, I was hauling timber and sweeping up sawdust at the yard, dreaming of the day I'd build a home that belonged entirely to me. I met Margaret on a spring afternoon when I stopped by a small diner for coffee after work. She was wiping down the counter, her auburn hair tied back, freckles bright against pale skin. She laughed at something the cook said, and the sound was like warm rain. I married her 2 years later under a canopy of fir trees with only a dozen friends standing witness. Together, we bought a narrow strip of land near the bay and spent weekends shaping it into something livable. I still remember pouring the foundation by hand, laying each board with a stubborn pride. Margaret planted lavender along the path while I set posts for the porch. We burned the first dinner on a half-finished stove and laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. When Clara came along, the house became more than shelter. It was a cradle for every breath of her childhood. The hallway where she learned to ride a tricycle. The kitchen table where we painted Easter eggs. The back steps where she cried after scraping her knees. I fixed the broken shingles each winter, built a bookcase for her school trophies, and stayed up sewing curtains when money ran thin. After Margaret passed from an unexpected illness, the house felt hollow. But Clara and I filled it the only way we knew, with routine. I packed her lunches, combed tangles from her hair, and read her stories until she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. There were nights I'd sit alone in the living room, her toys scattered across the floor, listening to the faint echo of Margaret's voice in my memory. Years blurred into decades. Clara grew, left for college, and returned with Evan, a quiet young man who loved photography. They married under an arch of driftwood I built by the shore. When Sam was born, I thought the circle of life had folded me back into its warmth. Sundays smelled of pancakes and maple syrup. Little shoes pattering across the floor. As Sam clambered into my lap, demanding stories about trains and bears. I retired from the shipping yard at 68, with calloused hands and a spine that still straightened whenever work needed doing. My pension wasn't grand, but it kept the lights on and the pantry full. I mowed the grass, tended roses for Margaret, and made wooden toys in the shed for Sam. Life was quiet, steady, the way an aging man hopes for after years of storms. Evenings were my favorite. I'd sit on the porch swing with Sam curled against my chest, telling him how the bay once teemed with fishermen and how I'd learned to spot which logs would split clean under an axe. Clara would come out wiping her hands on a towel, teasing me about spoiling her son with too many stories. Evan snapped photos me with my gray hair ruffled by Sam's tiny hands, and sometimes I caught the softness in Clara's gaze before she turned away. I didn't imagine trouble waiting at the edge of all that comfort. I thought the bond built from scraped knees, bedtime songs, and years of shared meals was indestructible. Looking back, maybe I missed the small signs. Clara's tightened jaw when bills piled up. Evan's restless pacing in the yard after late-night phone calls. The way conversations grew shorter when I asked if everything was all right. Still, each morning I brewed strong coffee, opened the curtains to the smell of the bay, and felt thankful. I believed I had earned this peace, the kind forged by sweat and devotion. That's why, when I packed my bag for a short trip to visit an old army friend, I didn't hesitate. I folded a shirt for Sam, tucked a postcard for Clara, and locked the front door, thinking I'd return to the same laughter. The same porch swing waiting in the sun. I had no way of knowing that the ground beneath all those memories had already started to shift. Quiet and unseen. Preparing to break open the day I came back. People kept telling me to take a break, but I never learned how. Work had been my rhythm for so long that rest felt like forgetting to breathe. The invitation came in a plain white envelope from a non-profit that runs retreats for older workers and veterans along the Mendocino coast. 3 nights, simple rooms, hot meals, quiet trails. I almost tossed it in the drawer with old bills. Then I saw the date lined up with the week, an old army buddy, Neil Porter, planned to pass through the state. He wrote me a note in his sharp block letters. Come up, Art. Let the ocean fix your head for a while. I called Clara and told her I would be out of town for a few days. She said sure, that should be fine. Her voice flat like a screen with the brightness turned down. Evan asked if I could leave the spare key on the hook by the back door in case a package arrived. Sam shouted from the background about a school project. It all sounded normal. I chose to believe it was. I took the early bus north. The sky was pale and clean. The kind of morning that makes everything look newly washed. When we reached the ridge, the coast opened below like a long strip of steel. The retreat center sat on a bluff with a rough fence and a small bell by the gate. A woman named Denise checked me in and pressed a folded map into my hand. Breakfast at 7. Walks every hour. Coffee all day. She smiled and told me the only rule was to let the water do its work. My room was plain. A narrow bed. A wooden chair. A small window that faced the cove. The walls smelled of cedar. I set my bag down and listened to the waves. They came in steady. A sound like a slow heartbeat. For the first time in months, my shoulders loosened. I walked the path by the cliffs with Neil. He limped a little from an old injury and joked about it the way men do when we do not want to talk about pain. We pointed at gulls, at black rocks veined with white, at crab traps shining in the distance. At the end of the trail, we stood near a fence post and said nothing for a long while. I told him about Margaret. He told me about a winter in Wyoming when he could not get out of bed for a week because the house sounded too empty. We did not try to fix each other. It was enough to stand and listen to water. The center served thick oatmeal with blueberries in the mornings. Lunch was soup and bread. Supper was roast chicken that tasted like Sundays used to taste. After dinner, they put out a tin of peppermint candies. I kept 2 in my pocket for later. I slept with the window cracked. The night air cool on my face. Dreams came and went without noise. On the second day, we visited a small town nearby. There was a store that sold old tools and maps. I picked up a brass compass for Sam. It fit in my palm like a coin, and clicked when it closed. The shopkeeper wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with a string. For Clara, I bought a recipe card for a simple lemon cake like her mother used to make. For Evan, I found a thin book on coastal photography. I tried to call them from the bench outside the shop. The call went to voicemail. I left a short message and told Sam I would bring him something special that points north. When I sat on the beach that afternoon, I watched a boy run along the tide line with his father close behind. The boy threw a piece of driftwood, and the father pretended it was a treasure map. It was a small thing, yet it pressed on my chest in a way that was not all sorrow. I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. I thought of how many times a day we pass by the exact moment we need, and only recognize it when it is gone. That evening, the group gathered by a small fire pit. Someone passed a guitar. Neil told a story about a storm on a mountain road, and the stranger who gave him a ride the last mile home. Denise poured coffee into tin mugs and said we had earned whatever rest found us tonight. I felt light, not young, not fixed, but light in a way that did not fear tomorrow. Back in my room, I wrote a postcard to Sam. I told him the ocean was loud but friendly, and that the compass was honest even in fog. I told him to keep asking questions, even the ones adults do not answer right away. I wrote a shorter note to Clara, thanking her for holding the fort and telling her I would be back on Friday before noon. I slipped both cards into the outgoing box by the office door. On the last morning, I woke early and walked alone. The sky was pink at the edges. The water looked like hammered tin. A seal bobbed near the rocks and then vanished. I thought of every board I had nailed, every bill I had paid, every night I had stayed up with Clara when a fever would not break. I thought of the way Sam's hand felt when he tucked his fingers into mine. I knew I had done many things wrong, but I also knew I had tried to love well with the time I was given. I checked out after breakfast. Denise pressed a small envelope into my hand. "A thank you card," she said. "Come back whenever you want." I promised I would. On the bus ride home, I held the compass box on my knees and watched pines blur past the window. The closer we got, the more I felt something rise. A steady lift in the chest, like the tide coming in. I decided I would take Sam to the pier this weekend and show him how to read the sky. I decided I would ask Clara what help she needed with the bills, and I would listen all the way through. I decided I would make a lemon cake and see if the house still remembered how to hold the smell. I believed that if I brought the ocean home with me, even just the sound of it, everything would make sense. I believed there was still time to set things right. The bus rolled to a stop at the corner where the Bay Road meets Birch Street. I stepped down with my satchel and the paper parcel that held Sam's compass. The sky was heavy with low clouds, and gulls wheeled over the harbor. I breathed in salt air and felt almost steady, the calm from the retreat still clinging to me. The closer I walked to the house, the more my chest tightened. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, swaying with the wind. A sweater of mine lay crumpled in the gravel, wet from a morning shower. Beyond the fence, the yard looked wrong, tools scattered, a pair of boots overturned, cardboard boxes split open and leaking books onto the grass. I stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Evan stood there, one hand on the post, the other gripping the frame of the door. His face was pale but set hard, as though he had rehearsed something all night. Behind him, Clara hovered in the hallway, her arms folded tight against her chest. Sam wasn't in sight. "What happened here?" I asked. My voice quiet. Evan didn't answer right away. He looked past me toward the street, then back. Jaw clenched. "Arthur," he said finally, "we've decided it's better if you stay somewhere else for a while." Quote, the words landed like stones in my stomach. I blinked, thinking I had misheard. "Stay somewhere else? This is my home." Quote, Clara stepped forward, her tone brittle. "Dad, we can't keep. You take up space. You don't help with the mortgage. You disappear without warning. Sam needs stability, and the smededvrens of many." I looked down at the small souvenirs in my hand. The compass, wrapped in brown paper. The postcard I hadn't yet mailed. They felt absurd now, like trinkets from a life that no longer belonged to me. "I told you I was going to Mendocino," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. I left a note on the kitchen table. "And the smededvrens of many." Clara shook her head. "That's not the point." She glanced at Evan. "We've talked about this. It's time." "And the smededvrens of many." For a moment, all I could hear was the wind rattling the porch rail. My eyes wandered over the siding I had painted. The window I once mended after a storm shattered it. The door frame still marked with pencil lines from Clara's childhood growth chart. Every inch of the place bore my work, my hours, my love. Sam appeared then, slipping around his mother's legs. He looked at me with a shy half-smile, then at the scattered boxes on the grass. His lips parted as if to speak, but Clara's hand settled on his shoulder. He went still, small fingers twisting the hem of his shirt. I bent slowly to set the compass on the top step. "I brought this for you," I murmured. Sam didn't move closer. Evan cleared his throat. "You should gather what you need," he said, softer now but still firm. "We can put the rest in storage." In many, I felt a heat rise behind my eyes. The sting of humiliation, burning deeper than anger. I wanted to shout, to demand how they could erase everything with a single morning's decision, but a heavier silence pressed against my ribs, urging me to keep my dignity. Without a word, I stepped off the porch and began picking up the things they had thrown out. Shirts folded and then dumped like rags. The small toolbox Margaret had given me. A stack of letters bound with twine. I brushed dirt from each item, as if restoring order could undo what had been done. Clara turned away, retreating into the shadowed hall. Evan stayed by the post, his mouth a thin line. Sam lingered at the door, eyes wide, clutching the frame. I wished I could tell him not to be afraid, that grown-ups sometimes lose their way, but I couldn't trust my voice to hold. When I had gathered the last of my belongings, I stood with the bundle in my arms. The house loomed behind them, familiar and foreign all at once. My memories were still inside, but I was not. I walked down the path slowly, each step crunching over gravel that once felt like welcome. At the street, I paused and looked back. The porch light flickered as if caught in a gust. Sam raised a tentative hand. A small, aching wave. I nodded, the only answer I could give, and turned toward town. The retreat's calm was gone now, swept aside by something colder, sharper. I kept moving, holding tight to the parcel in my hands, determined not to let the weight of their rejection bow my shoulders. Whatever waited ahead, I would meet it standing. I carried the bundle of clothes and keepsakes along the road until the houses thinned and the scent of the bay gave way to the dusty breath of town. The bus station sat behind a row of shuttered shops. I bought a ticket without thinking, my fingers moving as if they already knew the way. When the bus came, I climbed aboard, sank into a seat near the back, and stared at the gray sky through the window. The ride lasted less than an hour, but it felt like the longest stretch of silence I had ever known. I counted the telephone poles, the worn barns, the faded billboards promising fresh peaches or cheap tires. With each mile, the weight of the morning pressed harder, but beneath it, a smaller voice whispered of somewhere safe. A place I had guarded from everyone, including Clara. The bus let me off 2 blocks from a narrow brick building wedged between a bakery and a locksmith. Its windows were dull with dust, but I knew what waited behind the door. Years ago, after Margaret died, I scraped together enough money from overtime shifts to buy a small upstairs flat. I told no one. I needed a corner of the world that was mine alone, where grief could sit without company. I climbed the creaking stairwell, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of old wood and rain. Sunlight pooled across the floor, catching on a threadbare rug. My recliner still faced the window. Beside it, an old table held a radio and a coffee tin full of nails. On the wall hung a faded photograph of a younger man and woman, Margaret in a summer dress. Me with hair still dark, setting my bundle down. I let the quiet settle. I had always kept this place simple. A small kitchen, a bathroom barely big enough for a shower stall. But every item carried memory. The chipped mug Margaret once used when she visited on lunch breaks. The wooden stool I built during a lonely winter. The record player that had spun our favorite song until the needle wore thin. I filled the kettle, lit the stove, and waited for the water to boil. My hands trembled slightly. Not from age, but from holding everything inside since Clara's words. When the whistle blew, I poured the water over instant coffee and sat in the recliner. Through the window, I watched people crossing the street below, their umbrellas tilted against a drizzle. None of them knew that a man upstairs had just been erased from his own home. Memories rose like steam from the cup. I saw Margaret kneeling by a flower bed, coaxing lilies from the soil. I heard Clara's small voice calling for another bedtime story. I remembered evenings sanding boards for the porch, planning a future that felt endless. I had built that house nail by nail, board by board, hoping it would cradle our family long after I was gone. I thought about the morning I signed the deed. I wore my best shirt, shaking hands with the bank clerk, while Margaret squeezed my fingers under the table. We didn't have much, but we had that roof. It had sheltered laughter, sickness, hard-won meals. And now, without a whisper of thanks, I had been pushed out like a stranger trespassing on someone else's lawn. I walked to the small dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside lay an envelope of receipts, property tax bills, and letters from an old lawyer friend who had helped me set up the purchase. Proof that the place Clara now called hers still bore my name in ink. I closed the drawer carefully. There would be time to think about papers later. For now, I needed to breathe. I unrolled the flannel blanket from the arm of the chair and draped it over my lap. Rain tapped against the glass, steady as a heartbeat. I let the sound anchor me. After a while, I stood and put my things away. Toolbox slid under the table. The compass for Sam set carefully on the shelf. I hung my jacket on the hook near the door. The simple order of it steadied me. Like stacking lumber straight after a storm. I knew grief well, but this was different. This was betrayal stitched with shame. Yet here, inside these walls, no one could strip away the hours I'd earned. The calluses, the years spent holding a family together. This small flat, humble as it was, reminded me of who I had been before. I sat again, looking at Margaret's picture. I told her quietly that I was all right, though we both knew I wasn't. Still, saying the words helped me believe I could be. As the afternoon faded, I made a promise to myself. I would not let Clara's anger define my worth. I would gather strength here, in this room where every nail and scratch belonged to me. I would decide, carefully and without haste, what to do about the house and about the people who had forgotten the man who built it. Morning light slipped through the blinds, thin and gray. I woke early, my body still set to the old rhythm of years, when a day's wage depended on how soon you showed up. For a moment I thought I was back in the house by the bay, waiting for Sam to thump down the hallway. Then the smell of this small, flat old wood and coffee grounds pulled me back. Yesterday's rejection settled heavy across my chest. I brewed coffee in the dented percolator, the one Margaret once teased me for keeping too long. Its steady burble was a comfort. I sat at the little table and spread out the envelope from the dresser. Receipts, tax slips, the deed. My name, Arthur Bennett, still stood in firm ink across every page. No signature from Clara, none from Evan. Only mine and Margaret's. Faded, but legible. I thought about letting it go, packing another bag, moving deeper inland where no one knew my story. But that voice inside, the one that built porches after 12-hour shifts and stayed awake through fevers, refused. They hadn't just taken a room. They had tried to erase a man who gave everything. I needed advice. Someone steady. My mind turned to Harold Pierce, an old friend from union days who'd gone on to practice property law. We hadn't talked in years. But Harold had once said, "If you ever get in a tangle over land, call me before you call anyone else." And I dialed his office from the cracked phone near the sink. His secretary sounded surprised, then warm, telling me Harold still came in most mornings, even past 70. 10 minutes later, a familiar, gravelly voice came on the line. "Art? Been a long time." And I told him, plain and measured, what had happened: the bus, the boxes, the words that cut like wire. He listened without interrupting, only sighing once when I mentioned Sam's small wave at the door. "Bring the papers," he said. "We'll take a look. Nobody gets to toss you from what's still yours. It is manned." By noon, I was climbing the stairs to his office above the hardware store. The hallway smelled of paper and machine oil. Harold sat behind a broad oak desk, hair white now, shoulders still thick. He shook my hand firmly, eyes kind but sharp with purpose. We laid the documents out between us. He traced the deed with a blunt finger. "Clear as day," he said. "You and Margaret bought it joint. Her share passed to you when she died. Never transferred." 70. Relief came slow, mingled with sorrow. I wished I could have shown Clara these papers before anger took her tongue. Harold leaned back, studying me. "Art, you've got every right to stay or to decide who stays. They can't make you a guest in your own place." 70. I stared at the floorboards, worn smooth by decades of clients. "I don't want war," I said quietly. "I don't want to hurt my grandson." "Well, no need for war," Harold replied. "But you have to set a line. I'll draft a notice, simple and decent, reminding them whose name is on the title. No threats, no shouting, just fact." "Well," he slid a yellow pad toward me. "Write down exactly what you want. Whether you plan to reclaim the house, rent it, or just put them on warning." "Well," I wrote slowly, the pencil shaking a little, but steady enough. "Respect my ownership. No sale or transfer without my consent. Occupation allowed only while conduct is civil." Harold read it and nodded. "That'll do." He promised to prepare the document and send a copy for my approval. Walking back through town, the air felt sharper, alive. I stopped by the bakery, bought a small loaf, and tucked it under my arm. At the flat, I placed it beside the compass on the shelf, a quiet sign that even after loss, I could still choose order. That evening I opened Margaret's photograph again. I told her I was done letting silence swallow me. I would not strike in anger, but I would not disappear. This life, these walls, the roof that had held laughter and grief alike. They were proof I mattered. As dusk settled, I drafted a short letter to Clara in my careful handwriting. I will not argue. I only remind you. The house remains in my name. I hope we can speak with respect. Sam deserves that much. I sealed it. Not yet sure if I would send it, but comforted by the words sitting firm on paper. By nightfall, I felt a steadiness I hadn't known since the moment I stepped off that bus. The road ahead might twist, but I would walk it with my head high. No one could take from me what I had built, not without facing the man who laid its first stone. The notice went out on a Wednesday, typed on Harold's letterhead. I read it twice, signed without shaking. Facts only. Title holder Arthur Bennett. No transfer, sale, or lease without my written consent. Occupancy permitted only with civility and respect. Not vengeance. A line in ink. I walked back to the flat with the receipt in my pocket. I ate soup by the sink. The radio low. I slept with the window cracked. For the first time since the porch, I didn't dream of the door. The reaction came before sunrise. At 5:12 a.m., my phone vibrated on the bedside table. Clara. I let it ring. It rang again. Then again. A text followed. Dad, we need to talk. This is extreme. Please call. I dressed, made coffee, and set the phone face down. By 8, there were 6 missed calls and 2 voicemails. One from Evan. Calm at the start, frayed at the end. Arthur. I got this letter. What is this supposed to mean? You can't just. Then a long breath. Call me back. Please. I didn't. I needed a full spine before I heard more reasons I did not matter. When I came back up from the stairwell, a new message waited. Colder. If you're doing this to punish us, you're only hurting Sam. I sat in the recliner. Shame tried to climb my throat. I looked at the deed, at Margaret's photograph, at the compass. I answered with one sentence. Respect is the only thing I asked for and the only thing I will accept. At noon, the building manager buzzed. A courier stood in the hall with a hand-delivered note. The envelope had my name in a careful slant. Inside, Clara's tense handwriting. Dad. I'm sorry for words, I said. Things are hard. Evan's hours were cut. The mortgage shifted. I'm doing double shifts. And I am tired of feeling like I carry this house while you live here like a guest. I know that's cruel. I am not proud of it. You leaving without checking made it worse, and I panicked. I don't want lawyers. I don't want Sam to hear the word eviction. Please meet me at the diner at 7. Just us. There was apology. And the same tilt. Me as a weight. Not a man. Still. There is a place between anger and surrender where people can meet. I decided to stand there. I wrote a reply on a plain card. I will meet you at 7. We will speak as adults. We will not say anything we would not want Sam to hear. I sent it back with the courier. All afternoon my phone pulsed with smaller messages. Harold called to confirm the envelope had been signed for. He reminded me the notice was not a threat, but a statement. You do not owe them more than fairness, he said. I told him I understood. At 6:30 I walked to the diner on Maple. The bell above the door rang and the smell of hot griddle wrapped around me. Clara sat in a corner booth. A glass of water untouched. She looked tired. She spoke first. Dad. This letter has Evan spooked. He keeps checking the mailbox like someone's going to take the house tomorrow. Forset, it won't be taken tomorrow, I said. But it will not be sold over my head. And no one will throw me out again. Forsett, her mouth trembled and steadied. I was wrong to say what I said, she breathed. But you have to see our side. The bills. The repairs. The way you… She searched for a gentler word. The way you move like the house still belongs to you. Forsett, it does, I said quietly. On paper, and under my ribs. That doesn't mean I don't want you safe in it. It means safety has terms. No. She stared at the table. The waitress poured coffee and left a dish of creamers. Clara rolled one until the plastic groaned. Are you trying to make us leave? No, I said. I'm trying to make us honest. You can live there as long as you like. But not as if I never existed. Not as if a man who paid for the roof is a guest in the rain. No. She looked up, and for a second the child I raised was there. Eyes wet. Pride thin as paper. We're drowning, she whispered. Evan says we can't do this with someone looking over our shoulder. That is not me. I'm not on your shoulder, I answered. I'm at the foundation. That's where I've always been. That is not me. We sat until the coffee cooled. She folded the napkin into a tight square. Will you give us time? She asked. You have time, I said. But you also have a line. I slid a copy of the notice across. Read it again at home. Out loud. Respect. Consent. Civility. That's the whole thing. No. On the walk back, night settled in the trees. I felt both lighter and older. Back at the flat, I hung my keys and sat in the dim room that had held me up more than once. Messages pinged again. A long paragraph from Evan. Another from Clara. Thank you for meeting. I'll try. I turned the phone face down and let the room be still. Panic had visited them. It had brushed me too and found less to hold. What filled the space after panic was clearer. If lonelier. I watched headlights smear along the far wall. I closed my eyes and told Margaret what I had done. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had only put my name where it belonged. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was a promise I could live with. Woe nights passed after the diner meeting before Evan finally called. The screen lit up while I was sanding a loose slat on the chair by the window. I let it buzz twice, then answered. His voice was taut. Arthur. Can we talk? In very. I agreed to meet him on neutral ground, the park near the library. A place where Sam often chased pigeons in better days. I arrived early, sat on a bench beneath a maple tree, and watched the dusk slide over the roofs. Evan walked up slowly, hands buried in his jacket, eyes darting as though checking for witnesses. He didn't sit right away. He stood with his back to the fountain, then lowered himself stiffly beside me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I didn't plan for things to get this ugly. Nothing. I kept my gaze on the cobblestones. You planned enough to put my things in boxes. Nothing. He winced. That was Clara's breaking point and mine, if I'm honest. We've been under pressure for months. The mortgage jumped after a refinance. My hours got cut. Clara started picking up shifts at the clinic. I thought if we trimmed anything extra, we'd be okay, but having you there, even if you weren't asking for anything, it felt like a weight we couldn't lift. And crazy, you thought I was extra. My words were quiet, but they landed. Evan rubbed a hand over his face. I grew up watching my father drown in debt. He never fixed it. Never faced it. I swore I'd handle things better. Then I looked around and saw myself repeating him. Late notices. Credit cards maxed out. The bank calling. I panicked, and when you went away without much warning, something in me snapped. I told myself you didn't respect us enough to let us know. It made it easy to justify pushing you out. The confession was a raw edge in his voice. For the first time since that morning on the porch, I saw a man behind the hard shell. Still. The memory of his silence as Clara spoke, those words burned behind my ribs. "You could have talked to me," I said. "We could have worked out a plan. Instead, you threw years into the yard." And fifth. Evan's shoulders sagged. "I was ashamed. You built that house with your hands, paid every bill on time, kept it standing through storms. I couldn't bear to admit I'd let it slip so far. Watching you come back from that trip smiling while I was drowning felt like someone holding up a mirror I didn't want." And fifth. He turned, eyes lined with fatigue. "I'm not excusing it. I'm trying to explain. Wanting." I thought of Sam's small face at the door, of Margaret planting flowers, of the nights I lay awake counting nails because there was no money for mistakes. I wanted to hold on to anger, but part of me knew the soil that breeds cruelty is often watered by fear. "I'm not blind to struggle," I said. "But struggle doesn't buy the right to strip another man of his dignity. That morning, you and Clara treated me like clutter. I won't let that happen again." Wanting. He nodded slowly. "I get that. The letter heralds notice it shook us. Made me see the house isn't just a roof. It's your life's proof. I don't want to steal that." There is nodded. "Then don't," I answered. "Respect the work behind those walls. Respect the man who taught your son how to hold a hammer." There is nodded. Evan swallowed hard. "Clara's scared we'll lose everything. She thinks you'll evict us." There is nodded. "I don't want anyone homeless," I said. "But I won't stay silent if I'm treated as if I never mattered. You both need to understand ownership isn't just about papers. It's history, sweat, love." I let the words hang. If you can't live there with that truth, you shouldn't live there at all. Friester. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the smell of damp leaves. Evan stared at the ground, then met my eyes. "I'll talk to her," he said quietly. "We'll do better." Friester. "Talk is a start," I replied. "Action keeps the door open." Friester. We stood. He offered his hand. I hesitated, then shook it. His grip was unsteady, but there was weight in it, like a man holding a rope he hoped would pull him back from a cliff. As he walked away toward the parking lot, I felt no triumph, only a tired calm. The hurt wasn't gone, but something inside had shifted, letting in a little air. Back at the flat, I wrote a short note for myself on a scrap of paper. Dignity is not a gift to ask for. It's a boundary to hold. I pinned it above the table where the compass rested. The night outside was cool, and for the first time since the house turned its back on me, I sensed that the fight was no longer just about walls or deeds. It was about whether the years I'd lived meant enough to stand for. 2 evenings after meeting Evan, I was mending a loose hinge on the cupboard when a small knock rattled the flat's door. I expected Harold dropping by with another paper, or perhaps the building manager. Instead, when I opened it, Sam stood there alone, with a backpack slung across one shoulder. His hair was mussed from the wind, cheeks flushed from climbing the stairs. In his hands was a sheet of drawing paper folded into quarters. He looked up at me, unsure, and whispered, "Grandpa, can I come in?" I knelt, heart thudding. "Where's your mom?" "She's downstairs in the car," he said. "She said I could give you this if you wanted." "Well," he unfolded the paper carefully. Crayons filled the page. A small house, a tree with a swing, a man sitting on a bench holding a round object that looked suspiciously like a compass. Beside the drawing, in crooked letters, he had written, "I want Grandpa to stay." For a moment I couldn't speak. The room behind me felt too quiet, the kind of silence that holds its breath. I let Sam step inside. He looked around as if entering a hidden world. eyes wide at the old radio. The shelves lined with tools. The photograph of Margaret in her summer dress. "Is this where you live now?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "For now." He touched the compass on the table. "Mom told me you bought this for me." I did. I was saving it for a better moment," I said, pressing the parcel into his hands. "Every sailor needs something to point north. They were aid exust in." Sam smiled a little, but it didn't reach all the way to his eyes. He sat on the floor near the recliner, tracing the edge of the drawing with his finger. "Mom and Dad have been fighting," he said quietly. "They think I don't hear, but I do. I heard Dad say you were mad at us. They were aid exust in." "I'm not mad at you," I replied, crouching beside him. "What happened between the grown-ups isn't your fault. They were aid exust in." He looked up, serious beyond his years. "Are you coming home?" The question pierced deeper than any letter. I glanced at Margaret's photo, then back to Sam. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'll always be your grandpa, no matter where I sleep. And I think that Miss Stein," he nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. "Mom said you and Dad need time. I just want you to be happy again. And I think that Miss Stein," his voice trembled. I reached out, and he climbed onto my lap, tucking his head under my chin. His small weight anchored me in a way no document ever could. I felt a sting behind my eyes and let a single tear fall into his hair. We stayed like that until the clock on the wall clicked past 7. I asked if he wanted a snack, and we went to the kitchen. I made cocoa on the stove, the same way I once did for Clara when storms scared her awake. Sam dipped pieces of bread into the warm cup, grinning shyly when chocolate smeared his chin. Before he left, he walked to the window, looking at the lights beyond the rooftops. "Grandpa," he said, "when you're here, it doesn't feel scary." "It's not, Lee." I bent down so we were level. "Whenever you need a place that isn't scary, you can knock on my door, day or night." "It's not, Lee." Clara appeared then at the end of the hall, hesitant. Her face was pale in the stairwell light. She thanked me with her eyes but said nothing, only placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. He handed me the compass box again. "Keep it safe till next time," he said. I watched them descend the stairs. Sam turned halfway, raised his hand in a quiet wave. I waved back, holding the drawing tight against my chest. When the door closed, the flat felt different, softer, warmer, filled with the faint echo of a child's courage. I pinned his picture to the wall above the table. The crayons glowed against the dim plaster, a promise sketched in uneven lines. I realized then that my fight wasn't only for bricks or deeds, it was for the boy who believed I belonged. I sat down in the recliner, heart full and aching, and whispered into the room, "I'll find a way, Sam, for both of us." May decrees. The morning after Sam's visit, I woke before the sun. His drawing was still pinned to the wall, bright against the dim plaster. I traced the little house with my eyes. The crooked swing, the compass in the man's hand. A quiet resolve settled over me. I needed to shape what I could while I still had strength. I brewed coffee, letting its warmth seep through the chill. Then I spread Harold's papers on the table, the deed, the tax slips, the letter I'd sent Clara. My name was written everywhere, but ownership alone felt thin. What mattered was what these walls meant, and how to protect that meaning. By 9, I was standing outside Harold's office, holding a folder under my arm. He ushered me in, brow furrowing when he saw the dark rings under my eyes. We sat across from each other at his heavy desk, the scent of old paper filling the room. "I want to put things in order," I told him. "Not just for me, for Sam." "They day." Harold leaned back, hands folded over his stomach. You're thinking about a will? A will. And maybe something stronger. I don't want Clara or Evan fighting over bricks when I'm gone. And I don't want Sam growing up thinking a man's worth can be thrown in a yard. He nodded, opened a yellow pad, and asked me to speak plainly. I laid out what had to be done. The house would stay in my name until I decided otherwise. Clara and Evan could live there if they honored the conditions: respect, care. No sale or pledge without consent. If they broke that trust, the right ended. Then I asked Harold to create a second clause. A small savings account and a plot of woodland outside town. Set aside for Sam alone. No loans against it. No early grabs. When he turned 18, it would be his. With a letter explaining why, Harold scribbled. Then looked up. You're sure you don't want to leave the house straight to him? Not yet, I said. He's still a child. He deserves a home now, not a burden. What I give him should feel like a gift, not a chain. Or he have deck. We worked through language until the pages felt solid. As Harold prepared drafts, I stared at the window. Beyond the glass, the street glimmered after rain. For the first time since Clara's words, I felt something steady inside, like a beam driven deep into earth. That afternoon I returned to the flat with signed copies in a brown envelope. I laid them next to Sam's compass, then sat down to write a letter of my own. I told him about the woodland, how his grandmother once dreamed of planting apple trees there, how I hoped he would one day walk among them and know someone believed in his roots. I wrote that dignity was not pride but a promise to stand upright even when storms bent you low. When the ink dried, I folded the letter and slipped it into the envelope marked for Harold's safekeeping. Another copy I kept in a small tin box with Margaret's photograph and Sam's drawing. I wanted him, years from now, to open it and see not only a signature but a map of love. As dusk came, I placed a lamp near the window and watched lights spark across the town. Down on the street, a father walked with his son, their shadows stretching together across the pavement. I thought of Sam's small arms around my neck, of his voice saying it felt less scary when I was near. I whispered into the room, whatever happens between the grown-ups, you'll always have a place. Kiddo. The dention. I tidied the table, sliding the legal pages back into the envelope. It was more than paper, it was a line drawn in calm ink. A promise that what I had built would not be lost to noise or neglect. When night finally settled, I felt tired. But the weariness was clean. The shape of the future might shift, but its foundation had been set by my own hands. For the first time in weeks, I slept without bracing for the next blow. Late the next afternoon, a knock echoed through the flat, 3 quick raps. Then silence. I set down my mug and crossed the room. Evan stood in the hallway, rain clinging to his jacket, a folder clasped tight in both hands. His face was pale, eyes red around the edges, like a man who hadn't slept. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He moved cautiously, taking in the room. Sam's drawing on the wall, the compass on the table, Margaret's photo near the lamp. He sat on the edge of the chair opposite mine, folder resting on his knees. "I need to tell you everything," he said. "No excuses." I had a deal to say French. He opened the folder and slid a stack of papers across the table. Bank statements, overdue notices, letters, stamped final warning. "I've been hiding this," he continued. "The mortgage wasn't the only problem. I borrowed against the shop. Maxed cards, trying to keep up with bills. I was sure I could fix it before anyone found out." He rubbed his forehead. "When you left for that retreat, I felt small, like I was failing everyone, while you were out there living without us." An ekid. He swallowed hard. When you came home smiling, I saw everything. I wasn't. I let pride twist into anger. Throwing your things out wasn't about space. It was about me trying to push away the proof I'd lost control. End year. I studied his hands, gripping the papers. Knuckles white. Part of me wanted to slam the folder shut, to remind him of the morning I stood on the gravel, holding a compass meant for a boy. But the rawness in his voice kept me still. Does Clara know all of this? I asked. Not everything, he admitted. She knows we're behind. But not how deep. I thought I could climb out before she saw the bottom. Instead, I dragged her into my fear. End year. He looked up then, eyes wet. Arthur, I'm sorry. I don't deserve your trust. But I don't want to lose the chance to earn it back. If you let us stay, I'll sign whatever you need. I'll fix the debt. I'll treat you with the respect I should have had from the start. It's not no fray. I leaned back, feeling the quiet stretch between us. Rain ticked against the window. Margaret's picture caught a thin strip of light, as if she were waiting for my answer. You've made a mess, I said evenly. Not just with money, with the way you handled me. The way you let Clara's fear become your permission. That morning you turned my life into clutter. I can't pretend it didn't happen. In Match Dree the Long, Evan's shoulders sagged. I know. In Match Dree the Long, but... I continued. I won't carry anger like a stone either. I'll give you room to make this right on clear terms. I reached for Harold's envelope and laid one page on the table. These are the conditions. You and Clara stay if you honor them. No sale. No loans. No shouting someone out the door. And you tell her the truth about the bills. Sam deserves parents who don't hide behind pride. And never Tane. He nodded quickly, eyes fixed on the paper. I'll tell her tonight. And never Tane. Slow down, I warned. Promises are easy when you're scared. What matters is the work after the words. And never Tane. Evan drew a shaky breath. I'll do it. Arthur. I swear. And never Tane. I watched him sign his name under the clause Harold had left blank for that purpose. His handwriting wavered but held. He handed the sheet back as though it weighed more than the folder of debts. I folded the paper carefully, then met his gaze. This isn't a clean slate. It's a chance. Respect is the rent you pay for every roof I built. Next Iwan, for the first time, a faint smile flickered through his weariness. He stood, hesitated, then extended his hand. I took it, steady and firm. The shake was brief but real. At the door, he paused. Sam keeps the compass on his nightstand, he said softly. He tells us it points to you, and to see the loved. When the door closed behind him, the flat was quiet again, but not the heavy quiet of exile. It felt lighter, like a room airing after rain. I sat in the recliner, papers on my lap, and let out a long breath I hadn't known I was holding. Some wounds don't disappear, I thought, but sometimes they stop bleeding when someone finally owns what they did. And sometimes forgiveness is not forgetting. It's giving a man space to walk back through the door he almost burned. The following Saturday, the clouds finally broke. A thin light spilled across the harbor, turning puddles on the pavement into small mirrors. I opened the window of the flat and let the air in. On the table lay Harold's envelope, Evan's signature still drying, and beside it, Sam's crayon picture, edges curling slightly from the damp. I dressed slowly, folded the papers, and slipped them into my coat. My feet carried me down the stairs, out into the fresh morning. The street smelled of bread from the bakery and seaweed from the tide. I walked toward the Bay Road, past shops opening their shutters, past a boy washing chalk from a sidewalk. Each step felt deliberate, like stitching two pieces of cloth that had torn. At the house, the yard was quiet. No boxes on the grass. No crooked gate. Clara stood on the porch, hands clasped, eyes uncertain. Evan hovered behind her, pale but steady. Sam darted forward as soon as he saw me. He flung his arms around my waist before anyone spoke. "Grandpa, you came," he said, face pressed into my coat. "I told you," I murmured, resting a hand on his back. "I'd find a way." "Voged atham," was no shade with a toss of the mos. Clara approached, her expression softening. "Dad, thank you for hearing us out," she said. "We're going to fix things. Evan showed me the papers, everything. I should have stood with you sooner. Review not of you as lef. I looked at her and saw both the girl who once begged for another bedtime story and the woman trying to hold her family together. "We've all done things we wish we could take back," I said gently. "What matters is how we stand after. Review not of you as lef." We went inside. The room smelled faintly of lemon and wood polish. My chair by the window sat where I had left it, cushion plumped, as if waiting. Evan carried in a tray of coffee. Sam hovered close, clutching the compass. The house felt fragile, but alive. After coffee, I asked to see the backyard. Sam led the way, skipping down the steps. The swing still hung from the tree limb, rope worn smooth by years of hands. I sat on the bench near the garden and watched him push the swing, laughter rising into the clear sky. Clara joined me, and Evan stood behind, quiet. I reached into my pocket and withdrew a small envelope, the copy of the letter I'd written for Sam. I pressed it into Clara's palm. "Keep this safe until he's older," I said. "It explains the woodland and why I left it for him. It explains that love sometimes means holding firm lines. It he would do in fire." She blinked back tears. "We'll keep it, Dad. It he would do in fire." Sam jumped from the swing and ran over, hair wild. He held the compass high. "Look, Grandpa, it's pointing at you again. It he would do in fire." I laughed softly, throat tight. "Maybe it knows where home is. Is that retendery?" We spent the afternoon mending small things together, tightening a loose porch board, sweeping pine needles, trimming roses Margaret had planted decades ago. No grand speeches, only steady work, the kind that stitches wounds without words. As dusk neared, I stood at the edge of the yard. The setting sun threw gold across the bay, sliding through the branches onto the porch. For a moment, everything slowed: the house, the garden, the faces waiting behind me. I felt Margaret in the hush, not as a ghost, but as warmth inside my ribs. I turned to Clara and Evan. "Whatever storms come, this place isn't just lumber. It's the story of people who kept showing up." My voice caught, but I didn't look away. "Keep it with respect. Keep each other the same way. Not when tension." Clara stepped forward and hugged me tight. Evan followed, tentative, then firmer. Sam wrapped around all of us, laughing into the fabric of our coats. For the first time since that cold morning on the gravel, I felt the weight lift from my chest. That night, back at the flat, I packed a small bag, nothing heavy, just clothes, and the tin box holding Margaret's photo and Sam's drawing. Tomorrow I would bring them home for good. Before bed, I set the compass on the sill so moonlight touched its face. The needle trembled, then stilled, pointing inward. I sat by the window, breathing the quiet. Life had bent me, but not broken me. Love, even bruised, was still worth guarding. Dignity was not distance. It was the ground from which kindness could grow. When I finally turned off the lamp, the room felt warm, like a harbor after storm tide. Outside, The moon rose above the bay, silver on calm water, steady as a promise kept.